Joining me live in the studio now is the Ukrainian Ambassador to Australia and New Zealand, Vasyl Myroshnychenko. Thank you for your time. What are you hoping for out of this Anthony Albanese trip to NATO and Germany? Do you have hopes of more military assistance being announced?
It's very important that the Prime Minister will be at NATO. He will be there with other four leaders of the Pacific countries, including New Zealand, Korea, as well as Japan. And this is the second time that NATO's leaders have invited them to join. As you know, a big part of the discussion there will be based on support for Ukraine, helping Ukraine defend democracy. And there will be a lot of other bilateral meetings taking place in Vilnius tomorrow and on Wednesday. So I do hope there will be an opportunity for the Prime Minister to delve deeper into some of the current needs Ukraine is having, some of the pressing challenges, and what Australia could do more to support Ukraine.
All right, well, Peter Dutton and other strategic experts have said that the announcement a couple of weeks ago of assistance is like giving Ukraine a lump of junk out of the garage. What did you make of those comments?
Ukraine is fortunate to have support across different parties, from across different parties and parliaments in Australia, and a lot of them have reached out to me and generally supporting Ukraine's fight back, actually. And it's, of course, a bipartisan support that had been out there last year, and it's been phenomenal. I'm really, as an ambassador, interested in for that to be maintained. And of course, we are grateful for every piece of equipment that's been provided so far, which includes some trucks, but most importantly for the Bushmasters, which have been donated previously. Yes. And they've been delivered, and they've been saving many lives, and they really performed well.
What do you think about what Peter Dutton said, though? Is it up to scratch, the last announcement?
Look, you're very lucky to live in a democracy, and it's good you have this freedom of speech, and you have different opinions out here, because many countries don't have that kind of debate. And I wish for Ukraine to have bipartisan support, and of course, in any of that unity on this issue is something that we all have in many other countries. But look, it's what we've seen in Ukraine is very tragic. And during 2 weeks ago, I was telling a story about the two twin girls which got killed in Kramatorsk. In that same restaurant, there was also a Ukrainian writer, Victoria Amelina, who got hit by that missile as well. She still lived for another 3 days, but then passed away. She was a famous Ukrainian writer who turned to be a journalist who was collecting Russian war crimes. And she was there on a mission with Colombian journalists in eastern Ukraine. And she passed away. You see these obituaries published about her globally. All the international press has been writing about her. And this is something that we see every day. We see that misery, destruction, and we want that war to be over as quickly as possible. And hence, we need to ensure that Ukraine needs a kit to actually achieve it.
Well, speaking of freedom of speech, Paul Keating, some comments about NATO overnight. What did you make of those?
It's difficult for me to comment, Paul Keating, of course, and I will try to refrain from that. And I think at the end of the day, it's again, a sign of healthy and robust democracy that Australia is so lucky to have, where you have different opinions. Of course, it's in the interest of Australia to maintain very close ties with NATO countries, and especially it's important because what's happening in Ukraine is a global issue. It's not a regional issue. It's a global issue which is impacting everybody, everywhere, including Australians, including here in the Indo-Pacific region.
So from your point of view, fair enough to involve Australia and Asia in this summit?
Absolutely. And there is a reason why Australia has been involved, and it's not the first time it happened. And definitely the Russian invasion of Ukraine has undermined global security. It's undermined the security of the Indo-Pacific. It's undermined food security. It's undermined energy security. We see that if Australia we talk a lot about deterrence, but what is deterrence? At the end of the day, if Russians can get away with what they've done in Ukraine, what kind of a deterrence we can be talking about? It can inspire many other countries to change borders by force because they can do it. And how do some of the smaller nations in the Pacific feel about being cursed by bigger powers?
Well, what practical effect will the NATO summit have, do you think? We see a lot of these summits, it seems to me, condemning Russia.
It's a very important gathering. Of course, as you know, Ukraine has made an application for NATO accession. It's we hope to get more clarity about that path of how that's going to be and when that invite will come. All these NATO summits are very important because they help to coordinate support for Ukraine. And there is a mechanism of how military support is being coordinated in Ramstein, which is pretty much driven by the NATO member states, but also a number of other countries are contributing, including Australia. So all of this is a very important sign of actually sending a very strong message to Putin, because it's done in Vilnius, which is a country having a big border with Russia.
Yes.
And it's important that that message is delivered to Vladimir Putin, that he needs to withdraw from Ukraine completely so that we can get back to the rules-based international order.
Well, President Biden was asked overnight about the prospect of Ukraine joining NATO. Let's have a listen to that.
I don't think there is unanimity in NATO about whether or not to bring Ukraine into the NATO family now, at this moment, in the middle of a war.
What's your reaction to that?
I think NATO needs Ukraine as much as Ukraine needs NATO, and we've already demonstrated that we have the capabilities to actually make NATO stronger. And something, but maybe we are not ready immediately, but we do deserve a right to get the invitation to NATO. And the sooner it happens, the sooner we'll be able to get back to normal, because many countries still look at NATO and they still have a look at what's the Moscow reaction going to be. But Russia has been waging this war for 9 years, and they rolled in with tanks just only because they could do so. Just the only reason they did it because Ukraine was not part of NATO, and they were allowed to do it 9 years ago when they invaded Crimea, when they took over parts of Donetsk and Luhansk. And they were emboldened by that. They were emboldened. There was no very little reaction. And they, again, invaded us last year with a large-scale invasion. So I think as a deterrent for Russia, we don't see any other future for us. And our future security depends on membership in NATO. And this is what Ukrainian people want. This is what our leadership wants. And this is where we see the future. And
Where is this war going to end up? I think a lot of Australians are watching this saying, when is this going to end? Is this going to last 5 years? How do you see it ending?
I think when the Second World War started in 1939, nobody knew how it was going to end. There are still so many different ways how it can go. It can get worse before it's going to get better. We don't really know. But if you ask any Ukrainian, we can't wait until it's over. And we want that to be over sooner rather than later. But for us to get that done, we need to get the necessary military kit. So we're now in the counteroffensive, and not a single country has ever attempted to take over modern fortifications without air cover. We don't have air cover, and we are using our land forces to break through that. And this is something that we need. We need to get fighter jets to be able to repel Russians from Ukraine, and this is when the war is going to be over. Just as soon as we're going to get the weapons, the platforms we need to drive Russians out.
Ambassador Vasyl Myroshnychenko, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me.